The midpoint. The midpoint of a line segment is the point that divides the segment into two segments that have the same length. In other words, the midpoint is the point that lies in the exact middle of a line segment. In the diagram below, point K is the midpoint of line segment AB. The vertical lines below, known as tick marks, are used to show that AK is equal to KB. Segment bisector. A segment bisector is a line, ray, segment, or plane that passes through the midpoint of a segment. Let's look at some examples of segment bisectors. In this example, line M is a segment bisector of segment AB because it passes through midpoint K. Here we have ray TW, which is a segment bisector of segment SU because it passes through midpoint T. And finally, plane R is a segment bisector of segment DF because it passes through midpoint E. The midpoint formula. The midpoint formula allows you to find the midpoint of a segment on the coordinate plane. The midpoint of a segment with endpoints x1, y1, and x2, y2 can be found using the midpoint formula, which is x1 plus x2 divided by 2 and y1 plus y2 divided by 2. That formula will give you the x and the y coordinates of the midpoint. Let's take a look at an example so that I can demonstrate how to use the midpoint formula. On the coordinate plane, we have segment AB. If we look at point A, the coordinates are 2, 1. We're going to label those coordinates as x1, y1. Now let's look at point B. The coordinates are 8, 5. We're going to label those coordinates as x2, y2. Now that we have both of those points labeled as x1, y1 and x2, y2, we're going to substitute those values into the formula. One important thing to take note is that you could label point A x1, y1 and point B x2, y2 as I did, or you could do the opposite and label point A x2, y2 and point B x1, y1. Either way is correct and both will give you the same answer as long as one point is labeled x1, y1 and the other is labeled x2, y2. Okay, now let's substitute the values into the formula. When we substitute the values for x1, x2, and y1 and y2, we get the following: 2 plus 8 divided by 2 and 1 plus 5 divided by 2. Now before we could divide by 2, we first have to simplify what's happening on the top of the fraction. So on the left hand side we have to add 2 plus 8, and on the right hand side we have to add 1 plus 5. That'll give us 10 divided by 2 and 6 divided by 2. When we do the last step in this process and divide, we get the coordinates for the midpoint, which is 5, 3. What that means is that the midpoint of segment AB is located at the coordinates 5, 3, which is in quadrant 1. The midpoint is the point that lies exactly in the middle of segment AB. Example 2. In example 2, we have line segment JK. Let's go in alphabetical order and begin by looking at point J, which is located at 7, 0. We're going to label the coordinates of point J as x1, y1. Now let's look at point K, which is located at -5, -4. We're going to label those coordinates as x2, y2. Now that we've labeled both points, we're going to substitute those values into the midpoint formula. When we substitute those values, we get the following. 7 plus -5 divided by 2 on the left, and 0 plus -4 divided by 2 on the right. Now before we could divide by 2, we have to simplify the portion on the top of each fraction. And if you notice, on the top of each fraction, we have a positive and a negative sign next to each other. That's why -5 is written inside of parentheses and -4 is also written inside of parentheses. You have to have that written inside of parentheses in order to separate the positive and the negative sign. So before we could do anything, we're going to simplify that positive and negative sign. If you recall from your multiplication rules, a positive times a negative will always equal a negative. So when we simplify that, our problem looks a lot easier because now it simply says 7 minus 5 divided by 2 and 0 minus 4 divided by 2. So let's simplify the top of both of those fractions, and that's going to give us 2 over 2 and -4 over 2. Now for our last step, we'll divide, and that gives us these coordinates, 1, -2. That's our answer. What that means is that the midpoint of segment JK is located at 1, -2, which is in quadrant 4. If you haven't done so already, make sure to take out a sheet of paper and something to write with. You're going to need it for the next example. Example 3. Your turn. Find the midpoint of segment CD. Point C and point D have both been labeled for you already. The only thing you have to do is substitute the corresponding values into the formula and simplify to get your answer. You will have 1 minute. Please begin now. Time's up. Let's check to see if you got the right answer. Okay, so when we substitute the corresponding values into the formula, you'll have -7 plus -3 divided by 2 and -5 plus 7 divided by 2. Simplifying that will give us -10 over 2 and +2 over 2. And your final answer should be the coordinates of -5 and +1. That's the midpoint of segment JK. It is located at -5, +1, which is in quadrant 2. If you did not get that answer, please check your work and check to see where it was that you made a mistake. Now we have two more problems for you to practice and check your understanding. You will have 2 minutes to do these problems. The midpoint formula is in the top right corner of the screen. Please begin now. Okay, you should have your answers by now. Let's check to see if you got them correct or not. Okay, let's look at number 4. For question number 4, your answer should be the coordinates 2, 4, which is located in quadrant 1. Check your work and see if you made any mistakes if you did not get the answer 2, 4 for the coordinates for the midpoint. And now let's look at number 5. For number 5, the answer you should have gotten is -2, 3 for the coordinates for the midpoint, and that point is located in quadrant 2. Please double check your work if you did not get those answers so that you could see where it was that you made a mistake and fix your error. Okay, and that's it for this lesson. If you find this video helpful, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share.